We finished the tshuva yesterday. We did a whole tshuva yesterday. We were talking about somebody who I had asked to do some shopping for me, and he went ahead and instead of buying it for me, he bought one of the items for himself, and the other item he didn't buy at all. So when it comes to if he used my money to buy the one appliance, so we paskined yesterday that it belongs to me, even though he intended to take it for himself. Because when you use my money as my shaliach, then it automatically comes into my possession. The fact that he failed to buy another appliance, and I now have to incur a loss because I don't get the chance to take advantage of the sale anymore. So, ein lo alav elatar umos. So if the guy was doing it as a favor to me, and he failed to do his shlichus, then all I have are complaints because that's a grama. It's caused me a loss because had I known that you wouldn't do it, I would have found some other way to buy it, right? So you have tarumos, you have complaints. Now, if I hired a person to do it, so then I have a legitimate din Torah against him. And he quotes a Gemara where a person makes a stipulation in over below avid ashalim b'meitva. If I end up not doing my shlichus, then I have to end up paying for the loss that I've caused you. Now, the case is brought down in the footnote by the annotator. He says, he says, now, where do we get to this conclusion that there's a distinction in halacha between whether the shaliach is being paid or not? He says, because the Shulchan Aruch paskins in general, that if a shaliach fails to do his shlichus and I end up losing money as a result, then the shaliach is potter. But what about the Gemara in Bava Metzia says, that if a person sent his friend to purchase wine for him, the guy negligently ended up not purchasing the commodity. Chayev hashaliach l'shalim lo kamosha olo yayin b'parvasa dezul shafat ayin sham. He says the shaliach has to pay for whatever the price of wine is in parvasa dezul shafat. Now, what's the case over there? So if we take a look at the Gemara in Bava Metzia, ayin gimel amid beis. Just give me 1 second. Take a look at Safaria. Computer seems to be a little slow this morning, just like the rest of us. Yeah. I don't know whether it's my laptop or whether it's the Wi-Fi. But in any event, the Gemara does hold the shaliach liable in certain cases. So how do you reconcile it? So he says, Bimkein mevor shaliach chayv. So then you see that the shaliach is chayv. Al pizeh kasav hanesivos, the hasam irishu shalach es shaliach bischar. He says the only way to reconcile these two halachos, in one case the shaliach is potter, in the other case the shaliach is chayev, is where the case where the shaliach is chayev is where I hired a shaliach to do this work. B'lachein chayev l'shalem l'mishaleach. Aval ha'shulchan aruch ari k'shesholach es hashliach b'chinam ad kan tochen dvarav. Whereas the Shulchan Aruch that says that your potter is talking about where you ask the guy to do you a favor, but you're not paying him. The only problem is that Gemara never says that the shaliach was hired for pay. He says, why would the Gemara leave out that vital piece of information if that's the whole reason why the shaliach is chayiv, right? So it's a little bit problematic on the nesivos. So he says, "Umatzanu b'chazani shehikshakin ala nesivos." The Chazon Ish asks this kasha. V'lachein bir da hagamar b'bava metzia sham ayri davka k'shesholcho liknos b'makom shahamachir la'olam lo mishtaneh. He He says the Chazon Ish has a different answer. He says, I sent my shaliach to a place where the price is static and never changes. Hamachir hanamoch batuach. The low price is on a daily basis. Now, I knew the shaliach was going, let's say he was going to Beijing, okay, or he was going somewhere else in China. He was able to get me the item, and he just failed to do so. So the Chazon Ish says that's the reason why he has to pay, because I was relying on him. Aval Shulchan Aruch Ari al Kiniyas Chayra Shahasam Afim Yesh Mechir Kavua Bintayim Mikol Makom Ein Ze Batuach Ki Tamid Yochol Lio Shamachir Yishtaneh V'Lachein Ein Ze Nechshav Biyadu Shal Hashlich Liknos B'Mechir Hazol Ve'Al Kein Potter. He says, but the case where the Gemara says that the shaliach is potter is because the price is constantly fluctuating. And so it could always be that by the time the shaliach gets there, the price will have gone up, the price will have gone down. Therefore, you can't hold the shaliach liable in a fluctuating market. V'ayin shamod shedachas rayos hanasivos v'lechar yotzi lefi divrei hachazon ish debenidon didan harei b'shasha shlich kibel es hashlichus lo haya betuach shahaya biyado liknos es hamachshir ki ulai hamachir haya ola b'chazara o shekvar hayu nimkar mkol hamachshirim shebimivtza. He says, and therefore, according to the Chazon Ish, the reason why a shaliach is potter if he ends up not buying it is because it's not a given that he's going to be able to get it at that price. You know, a lot of times a guy will see, oh, you know, I just saw the circular Best Buy is holding a sale on this flat screen, whatever, and you know, you can get it at this price. Oh, I'm going to the Best Buy on Sunday. You want me to pick it up for you? So he says, sure. So the question is, what's the level of reliance in that case? So he says, because the level of reliance is low, because Best Buy has a policy, you know, they may have an advertised price on this flat screen TV, but they only have 5 in stock, right? So if you get there 5 minutes after opening, there's a good chance that they'll be sold out. It's really like a bait and switch kind of thing, kind of situation, where these stores do this all the time. And that's why people have lost confidence. One of the reasons people have lost confidence, you know, when there was no internet and we had no choice, so we'd get you know, the shmata and the circular, and we'd go down and, you know, hope for the best, wait in line, you know, and stuff like that. He says, but that's the reason. He says, according to the Chazon Ish, the reason why the shaliach is potter is because there's not full reliance, because it's clear that that he may not be able to pick it up. The imkein zen echshav lo biyado shaliach, and therefore it's not really completely within the shaliach's control whether or not he'll be able to control it. Ulafizeh, a shaliach hiya potter afilu im haya bischar, and therefore the shaliach would be potter even if he's being paid to do it. The eshila ayin bazeh. So there's different ways to interpret the reconciliation between these gemaras. Rab Sharaga is going according to the Chazon Ish, but it's not so pashut that everyone would hold that way. That the differentiation between the cases of when the shaliach is chayav and potter is when he's being paid for it. According to the Chazon Ish, that's not how to understand it. He's just going according to the Nesivas. Okay, so hold on. Let me just see if. Yeah, that's really weird, huh? Wonder why the. Here we go. So what did we say? What daf in Bava Metzia was it? Ayin Gimel Amid Beis. Thank you. So let's take a look at that. $73B. I seem to remember different parts of this Gemara. Here we go. Where Chama said, with regard to one who gave money to another to purchase wine for him, and the other, the agent was negligent and did not purchase for him, the agent must pay the one who gave him the money according to the going rate of wine in the port city of Zolshafat, where the main wine market was located, and he must purchase the wine according to the price in that market, even if it is more expensive than the amount he was given initially. So Ameimar said, I said this halacha before Reb Zvid of Naharda, and when he heard it, he said, when Reb Chama said this, he said that statement in a case where the buyer asked the agent to purchase wine without specification concerning exactly which wine he wanted. But if he said to the agent, buy this specific wine for me, the agent who neglects to buy the wine is not obligated to buy it at a higher price later, as when he was sent to buy initially, who says that the owner would have sold it to him. The one who gave the money to the agent was aware of the fact that the agent may not be able to successfully purchase that specific wine. Consequently, the obligation of the agent is simply to return the money, and nothing may be added to that sum due to the prohibition of interest. So, and Rav Ashi said the same thing. Even if he asked the agent to buy wine without specification, the agent is also not obligated to buy wine later for more than the amount he was given. What's the reason for this? The implicit obligation that the agent accepted upon himself to pay the one who hired him with the wine of a higher value than the amount of money he received is a transaction with inconclusive consent. Is any situation where one have to pay more money than he received is similar to the payment of a fine, and the acceptance of an asmach that does not affect the acquisition, as his acceptance is assumed to be insincere. So in sum, and I'm not really sure I understand why this is even a question, it becomes clear from the Gemara that it's all a question of reliance. Chazon Ish seems to be 100% correct here. I'm not really sure why the Nesivus is making this differentiation. It seems quite clear that he says, "The Misha Shalach es Chaver Lichnos Yainu Pash V'Lo Kanalo Lo Kamosha Lo Yaver Bazar In Came Before Shashli Achayev." I don't understand the annotator's question. It does say that you sent him for pay, so I'm not really sure how he can say this. Tzarachim on the annotator. It says explicitly in that Gemara that you gave him the money, you sent him as a shliach for pay. So there are two ways to understand this Gemara. One is that the distinction is when you sent him as to do you a favor, and the other one is you sent him for pay. That seems to be the way the Rav Shuraga is learning. But there's another distinction that the Chazon Ish gives. It all depends on what the level of reliance was. And therefore, it won't make a difference whether it was for pay or not for pay. It depends on how much was the dispatcher principal, like you said, how much was he counting on the agent to do the work? So how do you determine that? That's right. How do you determine it? It's a question of, well, do you and I currently have a business relationship? Is this a commodity that is clear that I need for my business operation? There are a lot of ways to take that into account, and perhaps Basin would have to eyeball it and take it into consideration. It's one thing if I ask my neighbor who's going down to Best Buy to pick up something for me, and he neglects to do it. So, in other words, in that kind of situation, if he picks it up, great. If he doesn't pick it up, no. There's not that level of reliance. It could be that the criterion will be if it's in a business situation or not. Is it something that I really need? And it may all depend on the circumstances.
Maybe that's the difference because he's doing still for free, but with the money of the shliach.
Well, let's see.
He's giving the money paid, he's not getting paid for the service.
Let me see what the Gemara says. Man diyohiv zuzi lechavri lemizban lechamra. All right, it doesn't say specifically over there that he's paying him to do it. It says that he gave his friend some cash to buy wine for him. And it doesn't say that he's paying him for his services. That's the point that the annotator was making. So I guess there may be more than one criterion to determine what the level of reliance was, but certainly if I'm paying you to do it and I express to you that this has to be done, and if you can't get it done, I want you to call me on my cell when you arrive, and we'll figure out another plan, right? In other words, then it's clear that there's a sense of reliance.
In the Gemara, it talks about the wine as being a specific wine or a general wine.
Right.
And if it's a specific wine, then you have to pay back to get that specific wine. And not a
Right.
general
So
wine,
again, so that would be another example. That would be another example of where there's not the same level of reliance, because if I sent you to get a specific wine, knowing that it may or may not be available, so then the reliance is not completely there. And
because I might want something else.
right, exactly. Okay, let's go on. Let's go on to the next tshuva. Simin Mem Dalet. B'din Adam sheherviach al yedei mamono shel acher. The halacha of what happens when a person profits off of someone else's money. We saw a bit of a similar question. Trying to remember, we had this a long time ago. There was something related to this. Oh, you know what we talked about? Remember we talked about the bus ticket or the
When you get it, where
Yeah, where you buy it in bulk and then sell it individually.
or the Ravkav or whatever it is. That's right. If you have one of those cards, then the fare is like 75 cents, and if not, it's $1, right? So, okay, let's talk about the halacha of where someone is profiting off of someone else's money. So, Adam sheshalach shliach liknos lo schar mesuyemet, v'hashliach kibel matana b'temura likniyato. So, I sent a guy to buy some merchandise, and the seller was so grateful that he gave my friend, the guy who sent to buy the merchandise, some tickets for the football game. Ha'im hamatana magia l'shaliach o l'ba'al hamaos. So does the gift, who does it belong to? Does it belong to the shaliach, or does it belong to the dispatcher? You know, it's really interesting because this happens all the time, where you work for a company and you act as a purchaser for a company. So the purchaser may, there may be multiple different vendors, and they want to try to attract the guy to buy from them. So even for in the private sector. Really?
buyers from some shares. They're not allowed to take anything.
What's that?
Okay, all right. Okay, now I remember there was a time when it was legal in the private sector, but it was illegal in the government sector. That's the way it used to be. And I had a member of my congregation, I was a very young rabbi, and he was selling cleaning products to the Navy. Okay, because I lived in San Diego at the time. It was a big Navy business. A lot of people do business with the Navy. It's Point Loma, if you know anything about California. So anyway, he got caught giving football tickets to some of the buyers in the Navy, and they did a sting operation on him, and he asked me to come to court to act as a character witness on his behalf. Well, the judge, gave him a suspended sentence and said, Mr. So-and-so, because the guy was like sobbing in tears, like I made a mistake, and he said, So the judge says, I know we're never going to see you in this court again. I think you've learned your lesson. Like he was really fishing in his pants. So, because he was just a regular guy. Could have happened to anyone, and he just thought he would get away with it and learned his lesson the hard way. So, but you're telling me that this is not even allowed in the private sector. Is that just Canada?
Many of the places limit what you're allowed to take. Anything over $50 or something.
But you're talking about an employer limiting it, not the government.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm
Correct.
talking about in the private sector, like I own a private company and I have a buyer who buys goods for the company, and the vendors try to entice him. So
But that's individual by company.
still, it does still happen. Well, so the boss of the buyer says, "Hey, whatever you get is mine. Halachically, it's mine. Who's right? Does the buyer get to keep the gift, or does it belong to the boss?" What's the difference? I see. Right. Does it belong? Well, does it belong to the company or does it belong to the buyer?
Company policy.
Yeah. Who to the point? Yeah. Lloyd is raising another question. And this is something that different companies have different policies for, right? Sometimes they'll make you give over the points to the company. You use the company credit card, right?
We have to do it on the SAP program. So everything will be good.
Air mile points, the big one.
Points also, yeah.
They pay on their credit cards. But the points for the travel, my cars, the points.
Okay, so I mean, obviously, sometimes it's company specific, and in whatever arrangement is made between the employer and the employee is the arrangement. But here the question is that there was no arrangement made. This happened for the first time, where a guy sends a shaliach, guy sends someone to make a purchase. The seller is so grateful that the guy is purchasing such a large quantity that he gives him a gift. The shaliach comes back and he says, "Wow, you're not going to believe this. This guy was so grateful. He gave me, he gave me a bottle of scotch." And the boss says, "Well, hand it over." And the guy says, "What are you talking about? He gave it to me. He didn't give it to you. So who's right?" So what's the halacha in that situation? Okay, so yeah, there you go. Let him drink it together. Okay. Isa Birushalmi.
It depends how good the bottle is.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. All right. Isa Birushalmi Maseches Demai Am Haaretz Sha'amar Lechavar Sheyikach Lo Yerek Michaver Acher V'lo Kach Bistam. So you have a person who has the status of an Am Haaretz. Now, if you've ever learned Maseches Demai, you know that there's two categories of Jews in the time of the Mishnah, a Chaver and an Am Haaretz. And it's actually, looking back at it historically, it didn't really make for a healthy dynamic within society. But you basically had two different classes of Jews. You had people who were trusted to always tithe, and to always remain in a state of tahara. And you also had other people who was the Am Haaretz, who was the guy who was Jewish, but was questionable in his level of Yiras Shamayim and his observance. And therefore, whenever you purchased produce from an Am Haaretz, you would have to tithe it again. Okay? You'd have to tithe it again. So, and generally speaking, Am Haratzim and Chaverim didn't engage in commercial trade in agricultural stuff because of that concern. So the Am Haaretz asks his friend, the Chaver, to act as his shaliach. He says to him, go to that other Chaver who's selling produce and buy from him stuff. V'lo amar bishvil mihu lokeach. And when the Chaver, shaliach, went to buy from the Chaver seller, he didn't tell him on whose behalf he was purchasing. So Rabbi Yehuda Sover lo niskabin hamocher lezakos ela lelokeach. Kevin shahalokeach chavar nasan lo daber she'enu mu'user v'hu chayev la'aser. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that the seller, knowing that the guy's a chaver, thinks that he's going to do everything correctly, and therefore gives him untithed produce, assuming that the chaver is going to tithe. Rabbi Yossi Savar, Kevin diyoda hamocher mehashlichus, afal pi shalokach bistam, lo niskavin hamocher hazel lezakos ela lebal hamos am haaretz, umemela nasan lo dover mesukan ve'enot tzarech la'aser. And Rabbi Yossi says the opposite. The seller is aware that this guy sometimes acts as a shaliach for an am haaretz, because he's a broker, let's say. But so even though he didn't specify on whose behalf he was purchasing for, nonetheless, the seller is thinking that he may be buying this for an am haaretz. And am haaretz is not trusted to tithe, and so therefore the seller tithes it before he gives it to him. So the Yerushalmi is discussing, right, what is the assumed status of this produce? Is it assumed tithed, or is it assumed to be untithed? Va'omer ha-Yerushalmi dilafi zeh, im nosan hamocher yerek echad yoser b'matana. And the Yerushalmi then says that if the seller throws in another, bunch of produce as a gift above and beyond the purchase price, l'das Rabbi Yehuda zeh magia lelokeach, l'das Rabbi Yossi zeh magia lishneihen. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the money belongs to the buyer because the seller is thinking about who the buyer is. Rabbi Yehuda thinks that, it belongs to whoever's the ultimate purchaser of the goods. And according to Rabbi Yossi, the seller is thinking that there may be some proxyship here, and therefore the gift has to be split between them. The Hikshasa Hagamara Sham de Matzana b'makom acher sheRabbi Yossi Omer shehamocher hiskavin lezakos lebal hamos. The Kanhu Omer shezeh magia lishneim dahainu yachloku. And the Gemara then asks a question over there, and it says, there's another place where Rabbi Yossi says that the seller is focusing only on the purchaser, like Rabbi Yehuda. And here he's saying that it goes to both of them. So how do you reconcile that? The Tirtza Hagemara dekan shneim cholka mishum shahamatana higia al yedei ma'osav shel zeh, val yedei raglav shel zeh, dahainu shetarach hashliach lavo veliknos, hilkach shnehem cholkim. And the Gemara says is that the reason is because it all depends on the scenario. In the case of the Gemara where Rabbi Yossi, it is argued, would hold that the buyer or the person who's the owner of the money and the buyer are two different people, is because it's a shlichus situation. So let me just clarify, because I'm looking at this Gemara for the first time. I think what the case is over here, that in the case of the Gemara, that if the seller gives the shaliach a gift, Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's the buyer who gets to keep the gift, and here the buyer is the shaliach. And according to Rabbi Yossi, they split it. So the Gemara asks in another place, Rabbi Yossi says that it's the guy whose money it is who's the one who sent the dispatch. So how do you reconcile it? So the answer is that in the case of the Gemara, in the case of the Mishnah, you're dealing with a shaliach who's purchasing on behalf of someone else. The seller is aware of that. He's grateful to both parties. He's grateful to the person who was making the purchase, and he's grateful to the shaliach at the same time, because the shaliach is the one who schlepped out to his store. So therefore, he wants to award both of them. So that's the way the Gemara explains it. V'yesh la'ayin bazeh mima de'isa b'maseches ksuvos. De'isa b'mishnah sham, almana shahisa ksuvasa masayim, u'machra shava mana dahainu chatzi ksuvasa b'masayim. O shava masayim dahainu kol ksuva b'mana b'chatzi machir, iskabla ksuvasa. So there's another Gemara in a totally different scenario, where a woman who's an almana, and now she has a ksuva, which is a promissory note that the estate of the decedent owes her money, owes her 200 zuz. Okay? She's an industrious woman, so she goes ahead and sells half of the value of her ksuva to a second party, but she sells it for more than it's worth. So the ksuva says it's worth 200 zuz. So if she sells half of the ksuva, you would think that the buyer would pay 100 zuz for it. She's able to get him to pay 150 or 200 for it. Or let's say she's less than industrious, and she sells half of her ksuva for, or she sells the whole ksuva for 100 instead of selling half of it for 100. So
Yeah, but isn't a kasuba a special case where the buyer is taking a chance that he's going to collect?
Potentially, well, it depends. She's already an almana. The case that you're talking about is she's still
When they're
married.
still married. Yeah, sorry.
He deceases him, so then you're right. The buyer wouldn't get anything. So v'hikshasa gemara sham. So in other words, in both of those cases, it's a valid sale. That's what the Gemara says. V'hikshasa gemara sham ma'ishna shava masayim b'mana de amri la hayasomim ativ sadata et atzmeich b'mesh shemachart ksuvaseich b'chatzi machir. So he says, so the Gemara asks the question. Why is it when she sells a ksuva worth 200 and she sells it only for 100, do we say that the yasomim can basically tell her to get lost? We're dealing now only with the guy who bought the ksuva. So you got your ksuva payment, you sold your promissory note, and the yasomim could say to her, you caused your own loss in selling your ksuva for half the value. Shavimana b'masayim nami tomer lahem ha'almana ani hervachti la'atzmi. So why can't she say the same thing? Why is it that in the first case where she sells half her ksuva? Oh my gosh, it's late. I'm sorry, I wasn't keeping